Good morning. I'm Rachel Bronson, the Lester Crown Nonresident Senior Fellow on Energy and Geopolitics at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, newly minted and delighted to be back. And welcome to everybody out there for this rapid response live stream program. Before we get started, by means of a disclaimer, please note that the Council is an independent and nonpartisan organization and takes no institutional positions. The views expressed by participants on the program are their own. If you have a question and you'd like to put forward your question, we're taking audience questions via ccga.live. Simply enter ccga.live into your browser and follow the on-screen prompts, and you'll be able to submit or vote for your favorite question. Now turning to our rapid response live stream topic today. Over the course of the past few weeks, of course, we have seen mounting anti-regime protests in Iran and global diasporas. My daughter is in Los Angeles and has been reporting protests in Westwood, California, among other places. Despite internet shutdowns and escalating violence by the government to suppress and silence these protests, the anti-regime activity continues to grow and take on new dimensions, some of which we will discuss today. As these developments unfold, the world awaits. I am delighted to welcome back to the Chicago Council Ali Vaez, Senior Advisor to the President and Project Director of Iran at the International Crisis Group, to discuss these questions. Many of you will have already seen Ali in multiple outlets. He's one of the most respected and oft-quoted thinkers on Iran. And Ali, I saw you quoted even as early as this morning as the New York Times on thinking about what comes next in Iran. So Ali, welcome. And let me throw the first question to you. Can you just get us up to speed on what you're seeing and hearing in Iran and from Iran? It is very difficult to get information. You yourself have tweeted, you have family there. You haven't heard from friends of mine who are Iranian, haven't heard from their families since as late as Thursday. Is there new information coming out, or what are you seeing to give us a sense of the shape of what's happening in Iran today?
Sure. Thank you very much, Rachel. It's great to be with you again. It's an incredibly grim and difficult moment for Iranians at home and abroad. I have not been able to reach my family in the past 5 days. There's some landline connections that have been reestablished as of today, but internet blackout continues. And so it's also very difficult to get an accurate image of what's happening inside the country. But there is some information trickling out. And I have had some contacts with foreign embassies based in Tehran in the past 24 hours. And all evidence indicates that this round of protests has subsided significantly in the past few days. And it's not a surprise. The reason is that the regime brought down its iron fist in ways that it's really without precedent in the past 3 decades. Regime officials themselves are admitting that there's at least 2,000 to 3,000 fatalities. Now, they are blaming it partly on terrorists that were deployed by the US and Israel. But putting that aside, it is really the most atrocious bloodbath that this regime has committed in many, many years. And that obviously has a chilling effect on an unarmed, unorganized and leaderless group of people who are going to the streets just out of pure desperation. At this stage, I think it is very likely that this movement would have fizzled out for now. But then the question, as always, is because the regime is not able to address the underlying causes, it's only able to suppress protests. They're going to reemerge. There's no doubt about it. And the question of whether they will reemerge in 3 days or in 3 weeks or in 3 months, no one knows. Last time, between the Women Life Freedom Movement of 2022 and this round of major nationwide protests, it took about 3 years. But I feel that the society has reached a breaking point now, and so I expect more turmoil just around the corner.
Yeah, thank you for that. Many analysts who know Iran well have said that this time around it has been different, that you've seen it, they're more broad spread, and you're seeing groups coming together in ways that they haven't. And there was conversations, right, about the merchants and the bazaris and how important that is for them to join this movement, different than maybe we saw in 2022 and even 2009 before that. Can you talk about what was different in terms of how widespread, or how different this is in terms of how widespread it is, and the unifying issues around the economy?
Right. So, look, I think there's a bit of exaggeration in terms of this being described as the most serious threat to the Iranian regime. I remember in the Green Movement in 2009, there were 3 million people on the streets in one day. And it also did cut across social sectors of the society, across gender, geography. It was a very broad-based movement. So this is not necessarily new. I think what was different about this round of protest was this sense of, number one, regime fragility, especially in the aftermath of the 12-day war between Iran and Israel, briefly joined by the US. And also a sense of desperation, of kind of finality, that we're getting close to an end point. That I think did mobilize people in ways that we had not seen before. This was no longer, the 0 to 100 happened very quickly. This was no longer about a specific demand, but it was about regime change almost from the get-go. The trigger was economic, but it became a cry for seeing the back of this regime immediately. And the second way that it was different was that it was, for the first time in many years, a convergence of internal threats that the regime is facing because of its lack of legitimacy and its inability to resolve the problems that it has caused across the board, economically, environmentally, socially, etc. But also, I would say a sense that there is external element, the threat of external intervention in ways that we had not seen before, and that's obviously related to the president threatening to go to the rescue of Iranian protesters if there is bloodshed. So these are the two elements: the sense of sort of finality and the convergence of internal pressures and external threats that I think made this round of protests different.
There's so much to talk about there. I want to go back to our conversation at the Chicago Council in July, right after the 12-day war between strikes between Israel and Iran. And you were saying then that and you continued to talk throughout the year about these kind of two camps that emerged from it. One who pointed to the strikes and as an utter defeat for Iran, and those in Iran, particularly the regime, who talked about it as a success, that they weathered that storm and were able to kind of continue on. Is that debate playing out in this in this context? You talk about how many feel the fragility of the regime based on those 12 days, but perhaps others who feel like they got through that, they can get through this. As you've watched that discussion evolve over the year, how is that playing out now, or is it?
Well, Rachel, clearly the former camps, those who were saying that Iran needs to change its ways, also those who were saying within the society that the sense of nationalism that emerged in the immediate aftermath of the war should not be confounded with support for the regime. All of those people were asking for reforms, maybe a moment of national reconciliation, re-engagement in diplomacy with the United States, kind of lost the debate because the regime believed that it had wind in its sails, having survived the worst that Israel and the US could do to it. it doubled down and, in fact, it decided to dig in its heels. That's why it didn't make any concessions to facilitate diplomacy. I mean, if you think about it, the ideological, almost, I want to say, lunacy of this approach of Iran not doing enrichment at all, and yet refusing to accept that it would not do enrichment. It has zero enrichment as reality on the ground, but it was not willing to make a concession along those lines. By the same token, it didn't give the Iranian people anything. It didn't try to open up politically. It didn't try to push economic reforms until it was too late. It's completely understandable for a population that just went through a major conflict and is witnessing its national currency devalue by more than 50% since the war. Bread prices going up 100%, more than 100% in the course of the past few weeks. This is a basic staple for Iranian families. It's a disastrous situation, and the regime again, focused on blaming the West and Israel for trying to undermine its stability by pushing for some kind of chaotic uprising in Iran, without actually trying to do anything to address the underlying causes. And this is, again, I think, one of the reasons that people had reached the stage of enough is enough when they came to the streets this time.
Are you surprised then that there seems to be, at least in the last 24 hours, a waning in the protests? Because these underlying factors are not going away. The economy tomorrow and next week will remain as broken. It's hard to imagine any way out of that. The conditions for this uprising are not going to change at all.
Look, I'm not surprised that they're waning, because the degree of brutality that the regime deployed is hard to withstand. As I said, for ordinary people who are not organized, they don't have leaders, and they don't have organization, and they're not armed. But it is almost guaranteed that this will erupt again. There's no doubt about it. And if you look at the pace of these kind of uprisings in Iran, they are becoming more frequent and they are becoming more violent. And this is why, again, there are some elements within the system who understand that the country is at a deadlock, that something's got to give. But they're still not able to convince the head of the system, especially the supreme leader, to make concessions, even to its own people. And the problem, I think, for the supreme leader is that he learned the wrong lesson from the Shah's experience. I mean, remember that these are the revolutionary Jacobins of the 1979, and they realized that the Shah's mistake was that he as soon as the revolution started, he admitted to having committed mistakes and started making concessions to the people. And when you give them an inch, they ask for a yard. So the supreme leader learned the lessons that you never make any concessions under pressure. The problem is that he also doesn't make concessions after the pressure has dissipated. And as a result of it, the country is in this deadlock. And there are some people who understand. But I don't think that they would do what's happened in Venezuela right now, again, because they are worried that removing the supreme leader or pushing for some sort of a regime transformation at a moment of peril would result in the whole thing unraveling.
Thank you. Jessica, if you could drop some of the questions into the chat. I'm having a hard time seeing them myself. Picking up on Venezuela is perfect. I wanted to segue to American policy. In fact, right now on Venezuela, the lesson very much could be learned that you can remove the leader, but keep the regime in place. So I'm curious what you think some of those lessons are. But before, as we think through that, let's just back up one step. The president has come out and kind of offered American assistance or threatened American military response and assistance if there's a bloodbath, which sounds like there really has been. And those are certainly the pictures we're seeing and what we're hearing. You and I were talking before the program started about how this kind of statement from the president is unusual. Do you want to talk about that and how that might be playing out domestically?
Sure. So look, U.S. presidents have had a long history of dealing with protests in Iran. During the administration with the Green Movement, we saw the U.S. opting for restraint. In Trump's first term, we saw the U.S. coming out actively encouraging and supporting the protesters. In the Biden era, we saw serious denunciation of repression. But we've never seen any American president actually threatening direct intervention. And President Trump has now done that. Of course, he's threatened in the past the kind of interventions that he hasn't delivered on, and sometimes he has. I mean, there is really a wild card here, and the president is unpredictable. I think the dilemma he now faces is that if he doesn't deliver on the threat, it might be portrayed as another Obama red line in Syria, which would basically undermine his credibility and embolden the Iranian regime. But if he does deliver on the threat, then the consequences could be unpredictable because there's basically no good option for the United States to intervene here. And there is, just like in the case of Venezuela, when you're dealing with a very entrenched regime, there is no shortcut to a perfect solution. There is no violent or magical shortcut to an outcome that is fully desirable for the United States. And by the way, I think one of the reasons that the Iranian regime brought down its iron fist in the way that it did before the U.S. had the time to relocate military assets from the Caribbean to the Middle East in order to be able to also protect Israel in case of Iranian retaliation, is because of the threat of U.S. military intervention. So my point is that there are a set of options available to the president: kinetic and non-kinetic. Let's think about some of these kinetic options. Of course, he can order political decapitation of the Iranian regime. It's harder to do now that the element of surprise is not there. I'm not saying it's impossible, but even if it happens, just like in the case of Venezuela, it doesn't necessarily mean that the current regime will be replaced by a less repressive one. In a case of the U.S. doing something militarily to cause regime collapse, let's say targeting every Revolutionary Guard's base and leader, the country could fall into some sort of violent chaos. Iran has the same fault lines that have resulted in civil strife in other countries in the region, like Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iraq. And there is also more than 400 kilograms of near weapons-grade uranium that is unaccounted for in that country. So, that kind of chaos and what happens to that stockpile in its fog, I think it's a really real security concern for the U.S. and Israel and the rest of the region, honestly. That stockpile is enough for 10 nuclear warheads and probably dozens of dirty bombs. Then there are non-kinetic options like cyber attacks, which I don't think would really move the needle that significantly, might temporarily disable some of the technology that the IRGC is using for repression. But first of all, it might be already too late for it at this point. And it might not be as spectacular as some of the interventions that the president has demonstrated in the past that he likes to engage in. Or he might double down on enforcement of sanctions. But Iran is already sanctioned to the hilt. And if he is to impose, let's say, an embargo on Iranian oil exports, he might endanger oil shipments from one of the most critical choke points in the world. So the reality is that the U.S. military is just not a tool for bringing democracy, ushering in democracy in Iran, and rescuing the protesters. Is that goal is simply, I think, unachievable.
Yeah, I do suspect we will see something around Iranian exports, and I do think that administration will be thinking about how they lessons learned from Venezuela, which are not yet learned, and how we may or may not apply that in a case of Iran. A lot of the questions in the chat have to do with what kind of outside intervention could be helpful. There is no silver bullet. And I think what's so difficult about this is in Iran, different administrations have tried different approaches and none seem to have been terribly helpful. Are there actors out there, either in the United States or elsewhere in Europe, or you're sitting in Europe, who could productively help those in Iran lead their way to a better future right now? Is there things we should be doing and shouldn't be doing in your mind? Because that's what's tricky. It's just sitting and watching isn't helping either. The president seems to say that help is on the way. So I think this is an active conversation. Are you hearing anything from Europe, your European colleagues where you sit or elsewhere, that you think would actually be very productive and useful at the moment?
Look, the Europeans, I'm afraid, have basically reduced themselves to a position of irrelevance almost in this case. They still have presence on the ground. They have embassies. But strategically, they don't have any leverage left on Iran at this moment. The neighboring countries of Iran are very concerned about being caught in the crossfire if U.S. intervention results in another round of serious conflict. As you remember, Iran did attack Qatar in a performative strike, but did cross that red line in retaliation for U.S. strikes on Iran. And there is concern that this time around, Iran, with its desire to rectify the perception of its weakness and try to restore a degree of deterrence, and also the fact that it is cornered and it sees itself in an existential battle for its survival, might actually take even more high-risk action. So the Gulf countries are concerned, but again, there's not much more than efforts at mediation that they can do. And we've seen Oman trying to once again host or facilitate discussions between the Iranian foreign minister and Steve Witkoff. But honestly, I think there are no perfect solutions. I think this is the first thing that we have to admit. There are things that could be done that are important, including to try to facilitate Iranian people's access to information, and so that they can also make their voices heard. I'm shocked and disappointed that since 2009, when we were all talking about the first Twitter revolution, when the Green Movement started in Iran, and people were talking about providing them with satellite internet connection. Now it's 2026, and we still don't have the ability to counter the kill switch that the regime uses on internet access. But that is something that I think it is within US's gift to try to rectify. Then there is something diplomatically that I think is important to start thinking about. I don't have a perfect solution, but I just share the idea with you, which is that what we have to start thinking about what kind of a soft landing one could engineer in Iran. The reality is, this is a process. It's not something that could be done with the U.S. pushing a button, and there's no shortcut to it, as I said. The question is, how can we start on a trajectory that would eventually result not in the tragedies that we have seen in other cases of U.S. intervention in that part of the world, but in a stable and sustainable solution that is good for U.S. interests and for the region and for the Iranian people. And one way of doing this is Rachel, that the U.S. has tremendous leverage in the form of its diplomatic and economic pressure on Iran. We've always tried to use that leverage as part of negotiations on hard security matters. Iran's nuclear policy, Iran's missile program, Iran's regional policies.
Oh, I think we may. Ali, are you still there? Let's give you a second to
political reform should come.
Ali, we lost you right towards the end of what you were saying. You were about to make that important point that we've always used our enormous diplomatic and economic leverage, and I think you were going to say as a stick, but maybe as a carrot as well. Is that where you were going?
Well, no, we've used it as a stick as well, but
right,
as an incentive as well, but to address hard security issues, like the nuclear program or Iran's ballistic missiles program or regional policies. I do believe that time has come because of the overwhelming universal demand for political reforms in Iran to also now connect the dots to what the Iranian people want with US sanctions relief, that we can provide basically incentives and an exit ramp for those within the system. Because one of the reasons that these protests does not succeed is that there are no cracks at the top of this system, because everybody believes that there is no exit ramp. That exit ramp, I think, should be provided in using U.S. sanctions as leverage, but not to dictate what the U.S. wants. But to support what the Iranian people want. And there have been 17 prominent civil society actors backed by hundreds of human rights activists and lawyers and academics in Iran who've asked for a referendum, for instance, a constitutional referendum. We should listen to them, and we should then put our money where our mouth is and try to use the sanctions leverage to facilitate the Iranian people achieving those objectives.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you're being, in some ways, generous in the sense that there was this off-ramp. There was an incredible off-ramp in the Iran deal about what the Iranians would get if they made certain concessions, which they did, and they made many of those concessions, and we killed it. So we had something in place to do this, and then the United States killed that, and we had institutions available to actually create some of the support for civic societies. We killed that in USAID, but the critics were also right. We hadn't done that organization hadn't done a lot of the work that was over time necessary to build something that provided a different path. So I think there's plenty of things that the U.S. could do over the long term, which we're not doing. I'm trying to summarize some of the questions I've been asking as those in the chat. Maybe let's finish in the last minute we have. You've hinted at it, but the questions are still coming. There is an opposition leader in the Shah's son. He doesn't seem to have the kind of presence that you would expect. It reminds me of Chalabi in Iraq, but maybe this is different. I know, have some questions about it, but outside, those who've been outside a country for a long time often aren't very effective, but internally they're not allowed to operate. Tell us your views on the Shah's son as a possible returner, and the fact that he's gotten some more popular support, actually, surprisingly, in this nostalgic look back on looking for anybody to help. What's your thoughts on that in the next minute, and then we'll let you be on your way.
Yeah, I know we have a hard stop in a minute, so I'll be brief. Look, the reality is that Reza Pahlavi's stock has been improving in the past few months. There's no doubt about it. But what we don't know is the extent of his support. His supporters would say he is broadly seen as a viable alternative. The simple fact is that we don't know. He might be at 30% or 50% or 60%. But one thing is clear: he's not yet seen as a unifier, as a consensual leader that everybody inside or outside of the country believe that he is the one who can lead the transition from this regime. And the second problem that he has is that, unlike Khomeini in the run-up to the 1979 revolution, he doesn't have an organization and network on the ground to be able to do his bidding. And that, I think, is a major factor hampering his ability to be an agent of change.
Thank you. I think one of the key takeaways from this program, something I will take away, is your sense of at this moment at 9:30 Central, the things that you're hearing suggest that this revolutionary fervor or this change may be waning, just as the president is leaning in to say help is on the way. So we're at this really crucial moment where we can actually be watching the effects of that, as understanding that in the dynamics inside Iran are also shifting. So you've helped shape this moment for us and these dynamics that are happening that will help us understand the hours and days ahead. So for that, I'm very grateful. Thank you for taking time out of your conference in the Dolomites, where you're working on nuclear issues and helping the next generation, to take time to speak to the press in general and us in particular. So thank you so much. And thank you to all of those who have joined us today.
Always a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.